This is our first panel discussion about heat pumps. So we have a panel of regular homeowners like myself who are not experts at heat pumps, who can talk to you about what their experience is for installing heat pumps in their homes. All these folks have worked on that, including myself. First off, dial back, remind you that this is part of the 2023 Denver Metro Green Homes Tour. The home tour is on the 7th, Saturday the 7th. If you haven't done it before, great opportunity to get to meet people who have made sustainable changes to their home and their lifestyle. And you can talk to people about heat pumps and other things and kind of kick the tires and get to know what problems they had and talk to them about what things worked and what things didn't work. Not only heat pumps, but a lot of other things like PV and xeriscaping and all sorts of other things. The way we're going to do this is I'm going to give a little presentation about heat pumps. And again, I'm not an expert. This is completely out of my field. I only kind of geeked out, and we were going to put a heat pump system in, so I dug around on the internet and looked through some of the government publications and the papers that I could find, and tried to gather information that I think is relevant for people who want to buy a heat pump system. So I'm going to talk a little bit about heat pumps and sort of general things, and then our panel and myself will talk to you about our experience installing these. There's basically three categories we have. One is replacing a forced air system. So if you have a furnace that's run by natural gas or propane, replacing that with a heat pump to give you heating and cooling. The other thing that we're going to talk about is replacing a boiler system. So if you have a system where you boil water and you run it through the house, how can you replace that with a heat pump? And we'll talk a little bit about that. That's a little more difficult. The forced air system is really straightforward. And then finally, of course, we have some DIY. So people have taken on doing this on their own. And there's certainly opportunities for that and saving money. So let's get at it. So this is the title, Transitioning to Cooling or Heating Using Electricity, or How I Came to Love Adiabatic Expansion. So hopefully this will become clear to you. For the way I like to think about this is the question people always ask is, how do these things work? Why are they so efficient? How does a heat pump work? How can you get heat out of a cold gas? And really it's basically possible to get any amount of heat out of, or to get heat out of any temperature gas. It doesn't matter if it's lower than the temperature of the room you're in or really, really cold. As long as it's gas, there is heat involved. There is heat in those molecules in the gas. They're bumping around. If you can cool the gas down and you can extract, in theory, heat from any temperature gas. Now in practice, it becomes more difficult as you get colder. I'll just say that. But there's always heat in gas that can be extracted. So, and the way I can think about this, the way I like to think about this is if you've ever had a cylinder of gas or a propane cylinder, and this is to describe the cooling, and you open the cylinder up and let the gas flow out, you notice that the handle on the cylinder gets really cold. And that's what, that expansion, that adiabatic expansion, is what gives you heat. And that's what cools down the gas. And that's part of a heat system, is an adiabatic expansion which cools down gas and can cool your room. The other part is compressing the gas. So you compress the gas so that you can then expand it to get heat out. And that compression step also can make the gas hotter. In fact, that's how diesel engines work. You'll notice diesel engines don't have spark plugs. The reason why they can still ignite the gas is because they're compressing the diesel fuel, and that raises the temperature and ignites the diesel fuel. So those are two things you can think about to understand how you get heating and cooling. The heating comes from compression, the cooling comes from expansion. And those are the two important parts of a heat pump. So let's look at what heat pump systems look like. So as I said, you got the important part is you have these two steps, compression and heating. So a heat pump system is made out of a compressor, and it's also got a system where you do this adiabatic expansion. So in this figure, you have 1 and 3. 1 is the compressor, 3 is the expander, and then you also have a heat exchanger. So, or you also have heat transfer lines. So you have lines that carry a fluid from the compressor to a heat exchanger that's in your house that allows you to either cool or heat the house. And so, you know, when you think about these things, you're going to have a heater, a compressor, lines, and then a heat exchanger. Those are the basic elements of a heat pump system. And here's what the equipment looks like. If you haven't seen it, it looks a lot like an air conditioner. And that, in fact, an air conditioner is just a one-sided heat pump. Basically, you're just doing an expansion. You're not using the heating from the compression. But you've got a thing outside. That's what this thing on the right here is, or on the left. That's the compressor. And you can see on the right side of that compressor, there's little tubes that come out of that and go into the wall. Those are the transfer lines that take the heat or the cool from the compressor and bring it into the building. Then you have heat exchangers. In the middle is a heat exchanger that's used for replacing a furnace. So a forced air furnace, you would put that where the forced air furnace goes. So that's what's called a ducted heat pump. So it goes through the ducting in your house and provides heat and cooling to the house. The second one on the right, is what often called a mini split, and that's a ductless heat pump. And you may have these sprinkled throughout your house to get the whole house. Each of these units can either provide heat or cooling. And again, these are just the heat exchangers. There's a tube that comes into these things from outside carrying the transfer fluid. So that's basically how these systems work. Let's talk a little bit about cost, because that's one thing we really got to think about is cost. Let's talk about the actual cost of operating these systems. So this is data that I found online, and it's pretty easy to get. Just shows a comparison of heating costs for propane, natural gas, electric resistance heating. This is just where you run electricity through a wire, heat the wire up, and then heat gas that way. So comparing those three sort of standard heating processes to heat pumps, which are shown by the COP 1, 2, and 3, and 4. So the COP is what's called a coefficient of performance. It's an efficiency measurement. So, and what that tells you is you put a certain amount of electric energy into your system, how much electricity do you get, or how much heating do you get back? And those numbers are typically above 1. So you get more heat out than energy you put into the system. And you can see that for a COP of 1, you have 100% efficiency. A COP of 4, you have a 400% efficiency. You get four times the amount of energy back that you put in. And these are why these things are so efficient, is because you have these really high coefficients of performance. And you can see that if you compare the cost of running one of these to the cost of running a standard heating system, that at certain efficiencies you can run it cheaper than you can a conventional system. So like for COP 2, you can run that cheaper than you can use propane. So propane is pretty expensive, and if you have a COP of 2 or greater, you're running at a lower cost than your propane. If COP of 3, you're running a lower cost than natural gas. And these are prices, local prices. They may have changed slightly. You know, natural gas and stuff is always going up and down. So is electricity costs. But you got to take those into account. You can find these things online, and I can give you help with that if you have any questions about that. But the point is, it's the efficiency that determines the cost of operation of these things. And so what we need to know now is what's the COP as a function of temperature outside. Because this is the thing that people get hung up about a lot, is if it's cold outside, how am I going to efficiently heat my house? Well, it turns out they've made a lot of progress in the last few years on making very efficient heat pumps. And here's just a couple of examples of different brands. And I found this at the Northeast Energy Efficiency Group, and there's a website down there. Don't worry, I can give these after the presentation. But you can actually look up the measured performance of these, of different heat pump systems at different temperatures, and figure out, you know, how much are they going to cost relative to usual systems. And you can see that these are high efficiency or low temp, what they call low temperature heat pumps. And you can see that for the Mitsubishi, even down to -10, you still have a coefficient of performance of greater than 2. And once you get up to 30 or 40 degrees, then the coefficient of performance goes way up to 3 or 4 for both brands. And they have a bunch of brands on this. It's a spreadsheet. You can just kind of look this stuff up and kind of figure that out. So, at temperatures above, say, for instance, above 10 to 20 degrees, you know, your coefficient of performance is getting to be 3 and above for some of these heat pumps. So that's better than natural gas. So just think about it like that if you want. So the next thing we need to know is, well, another thing that people should probably be aware of is what is the temperature distribution during a year in your house or outside your house. Because if it's always -20 below, then, you know, things are a little bit dodgy. But if it's mostly in the 40s and 50s, then you're in prime territory for these things to work efficiently. So what I did was I looked on a NASA website, and I found some information at DIA where they recorded the hourly temperature at DIA, and then summed up all of the temperatures over the year at different temperatures. So they made a distribution. So at 40 degrees, there's 200 hours or so that are at that temperature. But you can see from this distribution that at those low temperatures, there's very, very little amount of time at those temperatures. So basically, even if the efficiency starts to fall off at low temperatures, you really shouldn't sweat it, because you're not going to be spending a lot of time at that temperature, right? Now, you don't want your house to freeze, so you might want to have some kind of backup in case it does get down to low temperatures, and you can you know, continue to heat the house and keep pipes from freezing. But really, in Colorado, the heat pump is going to be really efficient because you're mostly at these very high temperatures, between 30 and 40 degrees. Anyway, these are things to think about, you know. How much do you really need to worry about these really cold days? So how do you estimate the heating need of your house? Well, there's quite a few websites out there that'll allow you to do that. And really, all these things are estimates. They depend on insulation, windows, age of the house, a lot of different factors. But there are different websites you can try to make an estimate. And I think it's worth doing that, just to kind of figure out and if you have a contractor come in to estimate it, he'll have his own way of doing that. A lot of times it's just sort of seat of the pants. Sometimes they do it from satellite, and they look at the size of the house and try to figure out what the heating load's going to be. But you can do different things on these. Some of these websites you put in more detailed information about walls and insulation and windows and things like that. So, okay, cost, equipment cost. So this is the big one. So I've looked at a number of different sites, and the costs that I've seen, and again, these are, I think, just sort of global numbers. The costs can be between $3,000 and $15,000, depending on a lot of factors, depending on how big your house is, how big of a heat pump you need, and you know, any kind of mechanical or electrical. there's a lot of things that go into it. The efficiency of the heater, the brand of the heater, all those things play a role in the cost of the system. As I said, you have a compressor. You can have one compressor with multiple different heat exchangers in the house, either ducted or non-ducted. So you can put you can mix and match from what I've seen. There's different size heaters. They often rate them in terms of tons. And I think this has to do with the flow of gas that they use. And so a high ton, like a 5-ton heat exchanger is for a larger house that requires more BTUs, and a 1-ton heater is for a smaller house. It depends on the efficiency. So there's actually 3 things that the coefficient of performance that I talked about earlier, but there's 2 sort of seasonally adjusted numbers that people use, the SEER and HPSF. And often when you're getting tax breaks, you want to make sure that your equipment meets those requirements, because often those tax rebates have requirements on these efficiency numbers. They give you greater discounts for more high efficient heat pumps. And then brand, as I said, the brand there's some brands that are more expensive than others. And that may be because of quality. I don't know. Installation. You might have to get, there's 2 things there's probably more, but 2 things I think are important: electrical and mechanical. So for electrical, you're probably going to have to run electrical lines. You might have to change your service. You might have to, add breakers to your system. You'll probably have to add breakers to your electrical system. And those can be pretty expensive, but there are actually tax rebates for that. So take a look at that. I think those come from you get tax credits, and you might get some rebates depending upon your utility and your local government. And then there's mechanical modifications that might need to be made to your house to bring in the lines, to site the compressors, and to figure out how many compressors. And if you're doing a forced air system, you might have to do or you're doing some kind of ducted system, you might have to put in some ducting. So just be aware that there may be mechanical costs too. And then of course, but then there are also a possibility for tax credits and rebates. And I've listed a couple of websites that I thought were pretty interesting about the cost of these systems. So those are things that you can check out to get kind of a handle on that. Okay, this is probably one of the more recent things, and maybe more important things, is what are the rebates and credits? And there's a lot of them out there right now. It's a good time to buy heat pumps, as you may have heard. And there's a lot of money available from the federal government, from the state, and even from utilities and local governments. And I've listed some of this information. There's a flyer on the table that has this information in it, basically, and a poster that describes not just heat pumps, but also rebates and tax credits that are available for PV systems and other energy efficiency changes you want to make to your house. I guess the one thing that I think I kind of wanted to go through was how you might prepare for doing a heat pump. First thing I think, and most important, is make sure that your insulation is optimized. You want to have, you'll be wasting a lot of energy and money if you have a nice heat pump system, but your house is not well insulated. So look into that. That's actually a much cheaper way to save money and energy, is to get your house well insulated. So that's really highly recommended. Plus, there's tax breaks for that too, and credits. So go ahead and make sure that your house has a high performance in terms of insulation and leakiness before you jump in with a heat pump. Power, you're going to need to have As I said, you're going to need to have power. Usually these things run on 220, and they can use up to the compressors can require up to 60 amps. So you need a pretty sizable amount of power. Make sure that's on your panel, or if not, you might have to get a service change, which I said can be covered by some tax, or can be not covered, but you can get some tax break to help with that cost. The type of heating system that you're going to need depends on what you have in your house now. So in the house that I'm going to talk about, and it was forced air, and so it was a really simple job taking the furnace out, putting in a heat pump. Pretty straightforward. Hydronic system, if you have a boiler, that becomes more complicated. If you want to just add heating or cooling to your house, you can use these mini splits, and that may be a good change for a hydronic system. Hydronic systems where you have a boiler, the problem in this country apparently is that the boiler, the temperature, they make hydronic heat pumps, but the temperature only goes up to like 120 or 140 from what I've told. And most of the existing heating elements around your house are designed to work at 140 or 160. And so that temperature gap can make those less efficient. Now I've heard that they're working on this, and they may be coming up with a heat pump that is, it can work at higher temperatures. So that may be coming down the line. So for those of you who have hydronic systems, you might be able to wait out and get a better system. Backup, it's really important to have backup. Like I mentioned, if the temperature does drop, you don't want your pipes to freeze, so you want to have that backup, although, I don't think it'll be used a lot. Contractors, get multiple beds. There's a lot of contractors out there, and some of them charge a lot of money, so just be aware of that. And then finally, if you're interested in net zero, you might want to plan your PV system or use community or solar gardens. That's, I should say, solar community gardens, or systems that can provide you with green electricity, because this is going to be all run by electricity. And then finally, I just wanted to say that this is addressing potentially a big problem, or a big carbon impact. House heating is responsible for over 400 million tons of carbon dioxide emission, and we can all do our part to reduce that. And as I said, you can pretty easily make your house net zero by having your own energy source. So that's basically all the talking I have. Again, I'm not an expert. I just learned stuff by digging around the web, reading some papers and reports, and actually having a system installed in my house. First of all, let me just give the panel a chance to see if there's anything that they wanted to say about heat pumps in general.
Yeah, so I believe for Colorado the standard is a low temperature heat pump, but not a sub-zero. And I've had mine about a year, so I went through those 2 weeks we had of, between 0 and 20 last winter. And it ran constantly, but it did fine, because I used one of the kind of third-party overall electrification contractors for my system. I'd asked about supplemental resistance heat with the heat pump systems and the air handlers. If you're replacing a forced air system, you can actually get, it's like a space heater where you're just running, electricity through a wire, but they install it as part of the air handler as a backup heat, and they did not recommend that for here. So I'm in Golden, I'm like 5 minutes away, so Applewood.
Yeah.
So I did fine last winter just with the heat pump, and you might want to have a non-electric alternative for when the power goes out, but that's true for a gas furnace as well.
Yeah.
So I don't know. The contractor I worked with did not recommend necessarily the built-in supplemental heat for the system that I got, but they did recommend, if it does get really, really cold, you can do a space heater or something to supplement.
Yeah, our forced air system we had a forced air propane heat system, And they replaced that with a heat pump, and then right on top of it, and I'll show you in the picture, there's a little backup resistive heating. And so if the temperature gets too cold that the heat pump is not working as efficiently, it'll just turn that on automatically, and you won't even notice it. But we haven't actually run it through the winter, so I don't have the winter experience, but that's what they claim.
So you don't have any heat strips, is that what you're saying? Nope, I don't have any resistive heat built in, just the heat pump.
Because usually they recommend the heat pump plus the heat strip.
They didn't for me, so.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So-
Yeah, so even if it gets below 24, because we're insulating the house, because the system's still running, we won't freeze. We just like might need to put a jacket on, kind of thing. So we're really spec that, yeah, even if at 10 degrees or 0 degrees, we should be able to keep our house at 65, 70. You just can't do that once you get below 24.
What brand name?
Negative 24 is what we're spec to. Fahrenheit, although they're getting pretty close. We have Mitsubishi.
So I live in a 1960 Applewood Hutchison ranch. I did not do the practical thing and insulate first because when I bought the house, the heater and the water heater were on their last legs. I was living on borrowed time, so I wanted to replace both of those before they died and before it was an emergency. So I actually kept my house warm through that last winter, no extra resistive heating with 1960s insulation. So it can be done. So on the left is the initial setup. I have a partially unfinished basement, so it's kind of just a forced air heater, and then the water heater is right next to it. And then there was air conditioning at the house with the condenser outside. And on the right, you can see the replacement system. I had mixed experiences with the installation. It should be 1-for-1 with a forced air system, but part of the package included a very large filter system, which I did come to appreciate during wildfire season. There's a very hefty filter system that this contractor installed. However, that was not part of the installation as I understood it, and I never received any spec drawings. So I think they saw this giant open room and were just like, well, we'll just put it in however we need. I do have plans to finish the basement someday, and they had initially installed the air filter right where my walkway was going to be, where the hallway was going to be. So things did have to get rebuilt. So I think that's my largest piece of advice is if you're retrofitting, really work with your installer, your contractor, or yourself, whoever it is, to make sure you have a game plan for the ancillary equipment, right? The air handler for the heat pump is the same size as my old furnace was, but sort of all the ducting and the filtration and stuff added a lot of volume that wasn't really accounted for because there appeared to be a lot of space. I think actually if you were working in someplace like a utility closet and they're confined, it would have been less of an issue. But that's my number one tip is get as-built get spec drawings to see how it's actually going to get installed.
So I think I'm actually next. I'll talk about our system. This is a system that was installed in a house in Howard, Colorado. So it's pretty cold up there, but not that much colder than Denver. It's a 2006-year-old house or 2006 house, so it had pretty good insulation. But this is a picture of the wall before and after we added the compressor. And you can see the black lines. Those are the fluid-containing lines. And that's this is a 4-ton compressor, so it's a pretty good size one. This is a picture of the inside our utility room showing before and after. And we replaced our water heater also. I'll tell you a little bit about that. But this is the furnace that was in there. And then they just replaced it with this. And right up at the top here is the electric supplementary heater. So that's a separate system. Didn't cost all that much. And just put it on there. You don't have to worry about it. What's that?
So you have the heat strip back.
Yeah, right.
That's thermostatically controlled. It just comes on its own.
Right. And you can see that these are the pipes that came through the wall for the exhaust from the furnace and from the heat, from the water heater. Of course, those are gone we have to fix those, but all you have is these black lines coming from the compressor for the furnace. The water heater uses the air that's in the room. So this is one thing I would recommend you look at is, it turns out it gets really cold down in there when the water heater's running. I'm not sure how efficient the water heater is, but it gets really cold down there. So we're looking at putting in a vent to vent the air, or the exhaust from the water heater outside, just so the room doesn't get so cold. I know there's, yeah, I don't know. That's one, I'm just starting to look at this, I'm not sure. But that's one thing you have to worry about is if you're gonna suck air from the house for the water heater, you're gonna be pulling air in through the rest of the gaps in the house. And I don't have anything to report. I just started looking at this. Go ahead. No, actually, they didn't, I don't think they had to do much at all. They just, I didn't actually see them, I wasn't there when they did it, but it looks pretty similar. I think they had to do some work down here on the bottom, but it looks like they maybe took off some of the ductwork to fit in the heat pump, but I don't think they had to do a lot of work.
Yeah, so we had a fun story. So our house is from '67. The boiler was about 35 years old. And we were spending, I don't know how much money on propane, that we ended up, just to save costs, we're keeping our house at about 60 degrees, 55 in the basement, because we're just tired of it. And so we started planning with the company on how to get rid of it and switch everything over. And of course, 2 months later, in the middle of the winter in January, our boiler dies. So our boiler and the old systems are here. Our boiler fed the baseboard heat for the entire house, as well as our hot water. So we had a small hot water tank that it also fed. And yeah, the whole thing just died. Apparently it was like way oversized as well and super inefficient. Yeah.
What's the square footage of your home?
Yeah, it's 3,400 square feet. It's a I don't know, a ranch with a walkout basement, brick kind of thing. Yeah. So yeah, we then stopped all conversations with this company. We stopped conversations about replacing the system and said we just need to take hot showers, right? So that was the first thing we did. My wife and I were going to the rock climbing gym for 2 weeks. That's where we took showers. We had plug-in heaters from the neighbors, and then yeah, we went with the heat pump water heater. I think Kelsey and Kelsey, I think you have the same one I do. A.O. Smith, I saw in the picture. And we just went with the biggest size, 80 gallon, because it's like a $200 difference. The install is all the same price. And then now, there's actually people not in our house right now, but we've had a flurry of contractors. I think 6 people are there today, 9 people are supposed to be there tomorrow, and we are now installing an entire mini split system. Mark mentioned there are no heat pumps in America that can just retrofit for baseboard heaters. I think it's in Finland they created it. They're starting to do some trials in the UK. In America, we'll get them in like 10 years. It's just, we're so far behind. So yeah, we're doing 10 mini splits. On the main floor, there'll be flat registers in the ceiling. So then they actually stick up into the attic. And then in the basement, which I have a picture of it being installed, there'll be the wall units. Yeah, and I think it'll end up being, like Mark's unit outside, we'll have 2 of those, so 2 double stacks. Yeah, I don't know what else to say. We're doing a whole retrofit, so it's everything. Brand new electrical panel. We have to double the size of it. We have to move the power. We did the full blower door test and everything like that, so we're gonna double the insulation in the attic. Then they're gonna do another blower door test and walk around the house and do air sealing, finding all of the gaps and doing all of that. And yeah, so we're just gonna like super insulate the house, and then they're adding on an ERV as well this week. And so that will exchange the bad air, or whatever you want to call it, for clean air and bring the clean air through a filter. And with the ERV, it'll try to exchange the heat or the cold so you're not losing some of that. So yeah, it's been a fun week. Yeah.
What sort of cost is it going to be?
$85,000, I think. So we were going through all the rebates. We're using Elephant Energy out of Boulder. They're kind of operating like a startup now. It's been really fun. But yeah, I think to get rid of the system and do the hot water heater was something like 10 to 12. I think the mini splits, because we're doing 10 units, 2 outdoor units, those are like 45. And this is all including installation costs and everything. And then everything else on top of that is new electrical installation, all that kind, and the ERV and all that. Oh, and we're doing a humidifier as well. So, yeah.
So is that 85,000 after rebates or?
No, I think it's before. Yeah, and so they're doing really good. They're helping us with the rebates that they can do ahead of time, like through Excel and everything, and then they're helping us with all the paperwork for when we do our taxes. Yeah. Yeah, and the rebates, it's nice working with a company. I know some of these people did DIY, and they'll talk about that, but a company will walk you through all that. Yeah.
How loud is the water heater?
It's not loud at all. We do have our, like, I guess, gym hangout area is right next to it, and there's this big grill in the wall, because that's where the boiler was pulling the air in, was just from our house. Even with, like, standing right next to that, it just sounds like a fan's running, and that's it. So any other room, you don't hear it.
Is it really worth trying to salvage and have a hybrid system with a backup of a gas-fired furnace that can still function?
I'll hand the mic over to some of, you all as well. For us, the reason it was cost effective is a new boiler costs like $35,000 already. So like that immediately was, in propane, we're spending $4,000 plus a year. So we're gonna pay off this in, I don't know, like 5 to 10 years.
Hey there, so I'm Jay Schubert, and we live in Golden in a 2,900 square foot house that was built in 1969 with a walkout basement. And we've been in that house about almost 6 years now. And when we moved in, we had a swamp cooler for cooling, and the house has a boiler, and we're on propane. And really what we did was, at a certain point, it was actually 2 years ago, when the wildfires were really bad, when the smoke was really getting us, we really loved using our swamp cooler, having the windows open, being able to, cool the house pretty quickly with a swamp cooler. The problem with it was that it was, it occupied a whole room, basically. Our swamp cooler was in the room that I used as an office, and so you couldn't be in that room. The thing was so big, it was a box this size, and the air pressure that would come from that thing meant you couldn't really even be in that room effectively. And you had kind of one cold part of the house, and it pushed nice, cool air out through the whole house when you had the windows open. But it was uneven, in the way that it cooled the house. And when we started getting wildfire smoke, we realized, well, you have to draw air in through the swamp cooler. And so we're pulling smoke into our house if we want to be cool. So we had to choose between, choking on smoke or being cool. And that was when I decided it was time to do something else about, air conditioning. And really for me, what I decided to do was try to do it entirely myself. And what I found was, so I ended up with 2 units, and I found them on Amazon. I think I spent, for the unit that's in our living room here, I bought this for $1,800 on Amazon. It's a DIY unit. I have one that's very similar, a little bit smaller, in our bedroom. So we have 2 units. That one was about $1,700. And each one of them I installed in an afternoon. And probably the hardest part of it, or the scariest part of it, was drilling a 3-inch hole, in my house through the brick and into the living room, trusting that this is going to work out and the thing was going to fire up and work. Because the way that the DIY systems work is that you get the line set that comes with them is coiled up, and it's pre-pressurized, right? Normally when you install a system, you have to have a technician come and draw down the lines and pull pressure, but the way these systems work is the lines are pre-pressurized, and basically you hook them up, you open a valve, you hear tss, and it's connected, right? And so basically I spent a very small amount of money to get air conditioning in our house. And so this does the entire upstairs. So our bedroom's upstairs, this is our living room upstairs, our unit outside, and you can see that I, kind of put some, they came with some conduit to cover the line set, and I feel like I was able to install it pretty cleanly in an afternoon, each one. So between that, what I spent buying them on Amazon, and a little less than $200 for an electrician to wire up the 2 connections I needed. I have air conditioning, and we don't really We do use them a little bit for heat, so we kind of supplement the heat with them in the winter. But I think we were able to pull this off for a very small amount of money to get air conditioning, and we still have that, swamp cooler installed. And one of these days, I'm probably going to pull it out because it's just actually kind of rotting the window that it's sitting below, But this has really allowed us to have a very, house that cools off very quickly. We only use it upstairs. The downstairs never gets hot enough that we need air conditioning down there. And so this has been a really great solution for us that was very inexpensive, very simple to install, and, is incredibly efficient. So we're really happy with what we did.
So you still have a gas furnace or?
We do, yeah. Yeah, so we're still running on propane. And, in the winter, we turn these guys on and get a little supplemental heat, but they're actually not, because of the baseboard heat we have, in addition to we have heated floors, under our tile, electric heat. Between that and these, we wouldn't be able to rely on these alone for heat because, they don't heat evenly, right? So we would need a lot more if we wanted to have complete coverage of our house for heat. But for air conditioning, we were able to get away with a pretty cheap, simple install.
I have a question. Did you use a Mr. Cool?
Yeah, so Mr. Cool is the brand, yeah, on eBay. They're about $2,500 now, yeah. So now you can get these for closer to, $2,400, $2,500, depending on the size. I didn't even, it was so cheap, I didn't even think about looking into it. I was just like, wow, that was amazing. That was super easy. It was an afternoon project, boom, done. And I hadn't even looked into your rebates.
Yeah, let me take over.
Yeah.
Because we're talking Mr. Cool. And I have some Mr. Cool handouts here. I didn't think many people would want to do DIY, but I think with Jay, I think it's a very reasonable solution for cooling. So my house is unusual in that it's a passive solar bermed from the north, highly insulated home. So my heating and cooling needs are extremely low compared to a normal house. And I didn't have cooling for a long time and I was trying to get my floors to cool with a chiller. I couldn't figure it out. So this is Mr. Cool's system, and I bought mine in 2019, and it was about $1,800. And I got mine from Supply House, which is a heating and cooling online vendor. I got a lot of stuff from Supply House over the years. This is my hole in the wall. So I didn't have to do 3 inches, but it's about maybe 2.5, going through wood beam and polyisopropyl, I don't know, insulation. And here's my unit being installed. I utilize the top of the refrigerator as my platform, and I ran my pipe not directly through the wall, but they give you like 16 or 18 feet of pipe. So I brought it all the way in and put it in a recommended spot, which is up high because I have a high ceiling. And of course the heat rises. So it's up high in my kitchen, and that's the only room that I use supplemental cooling in. The rest of the house doesn't get much more than 75, and so this one has all the passive solar and tends to get hotter, especially in the late summer when the sun is really low. So this was the outside unit. I didn't have a full picture of the outside unit, but mine is 115 volt, and I did have an electrician put in the lines. It's a 20 amp circuit. It can run on a 15 amp circuit, and it's dedicated. However, I would have put in a 220 line if I wasn't already working with 115 and a DIY system that I couldn't get to work, that I bought on Craigslist. So, and at one point, I don't think, oh, this picture, you can see there's a lot of wetness at the bottom of this, at the bottom of the evaporator inside. What happened is my pipe that goes outside sunk, and my condensate was not going outside how it's supposed to. It was backing up into the unit, and that was making it sweat. And so I'm still dealing with that because that kind of made a board go out. So I had to replace the logic board, and I'm telling you, Mr. Cool, they are so good. You know, it's a couple years later, it's a 5-year on parts. All I had to do was submit an online request. They sent me an email, said, what do you need? They had me test the outside unit, then gave them a code that told me we needed a new logic board, and I took the thing apart and replaced it. I mean, and I'm not, you know, I'm pretty good, but, but that's pretty advanced maintenance for just a homeowner do-it-yourselfer. So I was able to do that, and now it's operating again. So I still have to worry about my condensate because I had a HVAC guy come in, he put in a pump to pump the condensate out, and it looks like it went out after about a year. So I'm gonna have to figure out that. I think I might have to rerun my line into the bathroom drain instead of into the washing machine drain. But normally you run it back outside, but I didn't have a big enough hole in my wall. So I don't know if you have any questions, but if you are interested in DIY, Mr. Cool does make it super easy with their pre-charged lines. There may be other brands that are coming out with pre-charged lines, but this is a well-warranted system, if you ask me.
Great, questions?
What refrigerant does Mr. Cool pre-charged lines use?
It's for R410. That's the most recent, least, it's R22 is worse and R5 is worse, but they have some that are coming out with CO2. I can't wait. I mean, wouldn't that be cool? You use carbon dioxide as the coolant in your refrigeration system. Mitsubishi has one, but it's only for industrial. It's big. It's a big system. And there's a system called Arctic in Canada, and they may have one. The problem is they require an indoor tank. And I have gas, instant water heater, and boiler, and my floor is heated with PEX, and I need so little gas. Probably my highest gas amount that I use in a very cold winter is 80 therms. I don't know if you know how low that is, but that's pretty low. And in the summer, we only use 4 or 5. So replacing mine with an electric system, it's hydronic, it's going to be a little more difficult than people who have forced air. Any other questions?
I would just comment on my experience with Mr. Cool has been that it is very quiet. I actually can barely hear the unit when it's on. You have to really kind of put your head up by it to hear it. So the indoor unit is really, really quiet. If I had one thing to do over, I think, with the way I installed my bedroom unit, is that I mounted it on the outside wall of our house with some brackets, and the fan on the condenser is really not well balanced. It's a pretty cheap fan, it's plastic, and that thing wobbles. And if it's not properly, isolated, you can hear it kind of vibrating the house, and it drives me nuts. And I've recently been messing with it, and I've gotten it pretty quiet, but I think that if I had it to do over again, I would figure out a better place to sit it. The one that's for our living room is sitting on a concrete slab outside, totally dead silent, you don't hear it at all. The one in our bedroom, I think if I could do it differently, I would have set it somewhere. Or just put a little bit more into the setup so it's a little more adjustable with some more padding on it, because you know, you don't want to hear it.
So for you two DIYers, you're just using it for air conditioning, and you've got a Mr. Cool system. Do they also promote it as a Mr. Warm, or would you just use it for AC?
I mean, there's no reason you couldn't. So it heats just fine. It heats great, but I don't.
Does not include heat, I don't think.
Oh, okay. Yeah, mine definitely puts out heat, and it's just that.
115, and that's why, instead of 220.
Okay, yeah, I have one of mine is a 230 volt, the big one in the living room, and then I have a 120 in the bedroom, and they both definitely do heat. But when we have an open plan kind of dining room, living room, kitchen area, and that area will heat really well. But you know, I don't have a head in the office and the other, you know, the bathroom. So like, it's not practical to rely on it entirely. So we do, you know, supplement our baseboard heaters with it, but it's, you know, I think you'd have to have several units if you really wanted to rely on it for heat in each room. Hi.
Well, okay, so I have central air, so I guess that's what you call it, right, where they go throughout, right? So why would you do a mini split design instead? And kind of connected to that question, I was just curious if there's any way to solve an issue where somebody in the basement wants more heat than the person upstairs.
Yeah, but I think maybe, yeah.
So, I mean, I think the mini splits, you would go all mini splits if you're replacing a boiler or something. If you have ducting and the ducting is fairly good, you'd want the air handling unit. So I actually also have a mini split head. I have a hybrid system with the air handler, and I got a mini split head. So I have a ceiling cassette in the living room, and it was because my living room was always freezing cold in the winter. Didn't matter how much I turned up the heat, living room was just always freezing cold. So when they were designing my system, again, kind of pre-insulation as a quick replacement, not emergency replacement, I added a ceiling cassette, so a mini split for the ceiling. And so that's a really good option. You can have both. You can do a forced air replacement, which is the air handler. And then if you have a room that you want cooler or hotter, you can add a mini split if you want. It turned out when they came to install my system, the mechanical guy who came was really good, and he figured out that the dampers were turned on all the vents into my living room, and that's why it was always cold. So I probably didn't need a mini split, but I have it now. And it's nice because in the winter, I can keep the rest of the house cool, and since I spend the majority of my time kind of in the living area, I'll just turn on the mini split. So I can have some more focused heating. So it does offer some flexibility. So you can have both. So you could kind of do purposely what happened to me accidentally. You could, you know, turn down some of the vents using the dampers to areas you wanted to heat or cool separately with the mini split. I don't know how recommended that is from an HVAC system point of view, though. I will say it's not efficient. It's not good.
Lots of questions out there. Come to the tour. You can see these things in real life and kick the tires. And
And we're still looking for volunteers, is that right?
right, if you want to volunteer, you can hang out at a house with and talk to the owner there too.